Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you. Very happy to be here, Luke.
Dude, good to see you again.
Yeah.
We spent a really intense week together a few months ago at the Hoffman process, and it's interesting actually seeing you outside of that, because when you're a participant in a process like that, the facilitators almost have an authoritative tone. You know, it's like you're trying to follow the rules and follow directions and all of that stuff. And it's funny, you just pulled up in front of my place in your car, and I'm like, oh, he's just a guy.
He's not going to tell you where to be when anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really good to see you, man. I appreciate you taking the time out.
Nice to be doing this while I'm here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, man. So since I did the process, you know, I tend to talk about these personal development and health explorations. Anything that I do that I find to be useful, I talk about it. And I've had a lot of people that are very curious about the process. And I've been promising them on social media and through email and stuff, I'm going to do a show about the process. Don't worry, it's coming. So I'm really stoked that you made it here. Yeah, we have a lot of curious people. And one of which being Neil Strauss, who's the one that first told me about the Hoffman process, but he still hasn't done it.
He's done a lot, though, because I've read, read a few of his books. But is it the most recent one, The Truth, where he mentions it?
Yeah.
Because in The Truth, he's gone into stuff very deeply, hasn't he? You know,
Yeah.
He's not a guy to just pick and be a dilettante, but he went in quite deeply, yeah.
Hardcore. Yeah, the process, that book changed my life. I had such a good time interviewing him about that. But yeah, when he writes a book, he fully immerses himself in whatever he's writing about for a number of years. Like that book actually spanned 5 years of his life. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's why there's so many different stages that he goes through. But yeah, in the book, he writes about the Hoffman process as one of the things that he's heard recommended. And then when he told me, he said, dude, let's go do the Hoffman process. And I got in touch with you guys, and they're like, it doesn't work like that. You don't like come with your friends. You need to come by yourself.
Come for a social week.
Yeah.
And he sent you down there as the canary down the coal mine.
Exactly.
To test the air.
Exactly. And then when I came out, I said, okay, I vouch for it. It's good. But it'll be great to get this recording. I'll send it to him, and he can get an even deeper dive. So let's get into how you first got involved in this process. What was your background before you became a Hoffman facilitator?
Well, apart from being sort of, uptight and repressed British, I had a training in academic psychology and a very curious nature. I just wanted to figure out what's it all about. Why are we here? What are we meant to do? And I think we're meant to do a lot more than just, earn money and pay the bills. So actually, I had come to live in California because everything that I was interested in, where sort of Western psychology had the most new adventures, as it were, and perhaps it looked a bit about what was going on in the East, in a spirit tradition, seemed to come out of California. And I suppose it was a part of the tradition was Esalen. There was a huge flowering of stuff going on at Esalen, Fritz Perls, many, many names. And a few years later, that was just, landing. So I thought, oh, if I come here, I'll be at the very crucible of it, ground zero for human development. And so it was. And I spent a few years here, and I got into various sets of people who did this or that. And like you do it by personal recommendation when you really want to do something deep, not just by, picking up a brochure. And eventually, and it was quite a few years, some of my friends started doing the Hoffman process, and they talked about it in a different way. Oh, I paid attention. But I still waited because I thought, okay, is it going to be another one of those 5-day wonders? Or not even, some things you do and they're over by Tuesday, the effect's over by Tuesday. But they were still talking about this 6 months and a year later, so I did it. So the background was I wanted to change. I was fed up with my life. The same old story about relationships, the same old story about depression. Looking at different methods. I knew that academic psychology or analysis wasn't going to do it, and I wanted something that brought in many, many elements. And for me, it was a great course at the right time. And I'm very glad to be speaking with somebody who's actually done it, because you've got a very deep, I hope, personal experience of what's involved.
Very much so. Yeah, I was actually, in preparation for this conversation, I was reviewing my workbook and some of those things, and it actually really brought me back because it's funny when you go through, or at least when I go through these transformational experiences, whether they be a weekend or a week, or in some cases, some of mine have been 3 weeks. During the process, it seems like I'm going to be sort of I don't know, you get so deeply invested in it that it seems like the vernacular and the experiences that you go through and sort of the framework that you learn are going to become part of your conscious mind and just how you operate in your life, where I'm going to take on the vocabulary of the Hoffman process when you're in there because you're having this profound experience. What's been interesting about it for me is that I rarely think about the process. Like once I was out, I went and did my 3 days out in the woods in Napa and, you know, just kind of reflected and took in the process as was recommended. And then I've done very little thought about it, but it's had a profound change on me on a subconscious level. My life has changed drastically in the most positive sense since then. But I don't have a direct cognitive correlation like, oh, you know, A plus B equaled C and here I am at D. It's just sort of like, well, wow, things are very different a few months later.
An emotional experience, an emotional education. I feel like interviewing you now, sort of going in deeper into your experience.
We can do that too. But what do you think? You mentioned the limitations of psychotherapy. You know, when you were looking to change, you said, well, I knew that wouldn't work.
I guess because we can go into our heads even more. We can figure it out. You know, I have, say, a problem with relationships, and I go to a relationship counselor and I learn all the little bits and pieces. I might even learn about, you know, how to better communicate. But I haven't had a fundamental emotional change about how I want to be in that relationship. And so it could be for overwork or never saying no or whatever the presenting issue is. I think there are certain limitations to thinking about it. And unfortunately, I know some people who have thought about it so much, they're really good at explaining it, and they become obsessed by it. It's a rationale for how they behave. So, you know, I think I wanted a sort of a bare guts and all really get in there and do it. I quite like intensity anyway, and it's great to have the chance to do, you know, a residential course. But what you were reminded of was my experience too. I couldn't analyze it right away because what was happening there was an emotional education, an emotional experience. And that will bring me on to, you know, a bit about the background of it, you know, because the man who founded it, he wasn't well trained. He wasn't an academic. He wasn't a PhD psychologist. He wasn't a psychoanalyst. He was a guy who felt intuitively how we might be and how we might change. And he just went in there. He just went in there and he would do stuff, say stuff, feel stuff. And people would be, well, you're a funny little fellow, but something about what you do seems to work. And so we had all these guys, you know, with brilliant intellects who say, I want to learn from you.
And this is Bob Hoffman.
This is Bob Hoffman, who I was lucky enough to train with. You know, I was, I think, probably the last person that he fully trained here in California before he retired, and he died, you know, a few years afterwards. He was the guy that I wonder now if I would dismiss him too much, you know, because I know a lot more now than I did then. It was nearly 30 years ago. And he didn't come across very polished. Now I expect somebody to know their stuff, to present it well, you know, to have all kinds of, you know, social media presence or whatever. This is a guy who could hardly handle, at the time, of facts. But he had a gift. He had a gift. No, he would say, can you make that call for me? Because I just can't work out how you put in the international number or whatever. You know, he would not have been very good with the whole internet now. Of all the teachers that I've had, and, you know, and I was in India for a while, and, you know, I studied in Europe, and then I studied here. Of all the teachers I had, he was in a way the most brilliant. And by brilliant, I mean he had a cleverness, but the brilliance was making things simple. He could package things in a very simple way. For instance, you know, on the first time I met him, it was the first day of the process, and you know, I went in there to try to impress him. I went in there to, you know, strut my stuff. Yeah, you know, I'll tell you how, you know, I'll run this. I've done a lot of stuff. And anyway, you know, I blabbered on about, you know, does this fit in with, I can see the sort of psychodynamic element, but there seems a bit of Gestalt mix in there. He said, you can't fool me. I'm too ignorant.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's nothing I couldn't say, the rug had been taken away from my feet, there's nothing I could really respond to that. So he kind of had me there out of my head and dropping down into here, and then he started going in there more, you know, about the old feelings. And that's what a lot of his course is about, and his legacy is about. What are we still sitting on that we can't figure out through books or through talking? What is the raw stuff that's in there that needs to come out? Which is why some people say that, you know, it's like going to emotional boot camp or a psychological detox. People use phrases that are pretty intense about. And one of the jokes I say is, you know, if I'm giving a talk, who's done the process, hands up? Who hasn't done the process, hands up? Who can't remember? And I get a laugh because most people will remember if they've done it.
Absolutely. Well, that's the interesting thing about it is I guess I was the canary in the coal mine for Neil, but I actually told my friend James about it. And it's funny because he just hit me up a couple hours ago and said, hey, let's go grab a burger. I said, no, I'm doing an interview about the Hoffman process with Tim. You weren't at the process that James participated in, incidentally. But anyway, he was all excited about it. But he was, you know, wanting to affect change in his life. And I said, you know, I haven't been to this thing, James, but I hear really good things about it. And based on what I've read on the website, it all seems to make sense in the framework that we have kind of worked within. And so he went and he came back and he was a different guy. I mean, he was sort of, I don't think he'd mind me outing him. I guess I'm not saying his last name, but he was British. Or he is British.
Still, he didn't change his nationality right afterwards.
He stayed British, maintained the accent, but he was very, very polite, like people-pleasing sort of personality. You know, not at all aggressive. I would say more so self-deprecating and just overly like nice guy polite-ism, and I think had a difficult time asserting himself in certain situations and just kind of standing up for himself and being strong and. You know, here he is, he's a very successful businessman. I mean, he's got a lot going on. He's a highly intelligent, educated, highly successful guy, but that was his little quirk that he needed to work out. And he came back and just like, I was like, who is this dude?
Really?
I mean, yeah, he came out and he was just very assertive. It seemed that he had really gained in self-worth, self-respect. He just kind of held his head higher. He stopped sort of taking shit in relationships that he was in, and yeah, I was just very impressed. So I kind of had my own canary, and when he came, I was like, all right, I'm going to do it.
Oh, good. You had someone.
Yeah, but I know what I was going to say is that it was strange though, because part of the process is that as a participant, when you come out, you don't really talk about the details of it because you know, give people preconceived ideas or kind of spoil the experience maybe for someone, or even deter someone from doing it if they get scared off by some of the modalities or exercises and things like that. So he was like dying for me to go so we could share about it and talk about the experience.
Talk about
yeah, because he's like, God, I wish I could tell you, but he's just like, it was really heavy. And then what was funny is going through the process, especially in a lot of the expressive work where you're really dealing with these core emotions and getting them out in the ways in which you do during the process. And I was laughing so many times in there. Like, here's James, like, he's a guy, I mean, if you're a guy and you hug him, he just turns into a board. I mean, he's not a touchy-feely, emotional guy. He's very, like, classic British, sort of repressed personality in a sense. And when I was in there, I was going, oh my God, how did James do this?
How did he survive?
He must have been dying, you know? I'm like a pretty out there guy. Even as a teenager, I did a lot of, you know, emotional expressive work and a lot of therapy and stuff. So none of it was very new to me. I won't say that it was comfortable to deal with some of those things, but yeah, it was funny to sit through that stuff and go, oh my God, I wish
he was really throwing himself in the deep end.
Oh yeah, and it, you know, it was beautiful because he just went all in. He went all in. He didn't hold back. He said, Luke, I just made a decision, you know, when there was something like, all right, who wants to go first? He would raise his hand. He just dove into the deep water.
He's a brave,
right from the
brave
start.
guy.
Very much so, yeah. I was so proud of him and had so much respect for him. And then I sort of had to step up, too, you know.
Got to keep my word now.
Yeah, having been the one that was like, oh no, you should really go. This would be good for you. And he came back and was like, this would be good for you. So how did Bob Hoffman come up with this stuff? And we're gonna, you know, when I say this stuff, we'll of course go into that. But where do you think he got the idea if he wasn't, you know, trained?
Well, definitely, you know, he got quite a lot of ideas about how the early family may condition your personality, because he himself had been in a Freudian analysis. And he also seemed to have quite a lot of ongoing conversations with an old Freudian analysis, an Austrian immigrant who came over in the 30s called Fischer. And he would talk a lot with him. But then he also had, and this is very rare now, he didn't clutter his mind up. he didn't have a lot of even books going around, let alone, having to check his text message or, who's messaging him on WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., etc. He kept his mind really clear, and he had a sense of intuition, a sense of knowing what was going on with people that, to me, I've never met anybody in my life who's had that. It was scary. It was like, oh my God, I can't hide anything from this man. And of course, in a context where people are saying, I kind of know what the problem is, but I don't know how to get there, he was an excellent guide in figuring that out. And I would say, it's mainly just intuition or a psychic sense of what's going on. But to put it more specifically, he could guide people back into memories of how they had emotionally learned to be, uptight or very angry or very scared or whatever the problem was. He could guide them back in and see and walk them through it as a child. Now, that may itself sound a bit scary, so it has to be done quite safely, and it took us a long time to figure out how to do it in a group and so on. But what he's saying is, yes, we've got these adult intellects, but there's a part of us that is still, and this is not new to a lot of people, part of us is still not grown up. Part of us is still stunted in our emotions, and we can call that a childlike part. And that's why, we'll have a temper tantrum in a relationship, whereas we can, be the CEO of a major corporation, but we still have that emotional part going on. And that was his gift, I think. He didn't clutter up his intellect too much. He got in there with the emotions, and he had a very strong spiritual connection. And I think that's how people could relax with him. You're not trying to manipulate me. You're not in this for the money. He'd already made his money, actually. He was a successful businessman. But you're doing this to help me. He had an enormous amount of compassion, and that motivated him. And he went on. And as I said, he was a quirky little guy. He was a short man, and there was a lot of Jewish language and Jewish jokes and Jewish humor in the way he taught. But he led people out of often, a dark place that they'd found themselves stuck in.
Let's go into some of the process itself. There was one bit of information that I got before going that I found intriguing and was kind of one of the concepts that helped me get on board because it makes sense, and that was this concept of the Quad Trinity. Can you break that down for us? Okay,
yeah, this is a fancy term for four parts. So what we're saying is that it's easy for us to understand ourselves if we kind of deconstruct a bit, if we put them in parts. So there's Luke and there's Tim, and we're talking, and we're kind of having, an intellectual conversation. So we could be the two adult intellects dressed as we are at our present age. So this is part of how we function. This is how, we go out in the world, figure out, how to get to places and plan our meetings and so on. And there's another part, and you just alluded to that, and you said, let's drop down a little deeper into the process, is now we're getting more emotional. So the two parts that are very conditioned in us are the adult intellects and our emotional selves. And the other two parts of the body, what's going on in the physical self, that may be a storage for all that's been going on in our lives, and is also a great way of expressing until we, find that perhaps we've been frightened of expressing. And the fourth part is what isn't conditioned at all and doesn't have any memories of being traumatized, etc., which is the spiritual part. And that part is, we don't kind of try to diagnose, but we give people some lovely images or background, and we do a lot of the visualizations for that. So your spiritual part, we'd say, is your intuitive part, your wise part, the part that takes you along a path towards, greater freedom, greater light. A bulk of the work is done with these two parts, the intellect and the emotions. So if you have all these four, you constantly knowing, are you aware of your body? Are you getting a message from your spiritual self? Or are you too much in the chatter, in the inner warfare of the emotions and the intellect to actually listen to the body or listen to any spiritual message? And partly the course is designed in a way that there's more ability to be silent and tune into what's going on inside, rather than just hearing, because we don't have to tune into the awful chatter of the shitty committee, as it's been sometimes called, or the Parliament of Fools that goes on in
the Parliament of Fools. I've never heard that. I like that. So my defense would be with the intellect.
it was safe for me to be very clever. And that's why I made that comment to Bob, and he completely took it away. You can't be too clever here, he was saying. That's not your vulnerability. You need to be more vulnerable. And not everybody wants to be vulnerable and go straight into the emotions, which is part of why we have a retreat space. You know, I mean, part of, I think, the intensity of Hoffman is you go there and you're warned, no cell phones, no magazines, no internet, no chatting with your best friend of an evening, no distractions. You're there for yourself, and that's why people call it, you know, not just a digital detox, but you know, there's an emotional detox going on, because you can really concentrate on that. So the Quad Trinity is there as a model for human behavior. You've got this, you can understand it, so let's go in. Where are you stuck? Is it, okay, you're not overly compensating on the intellectual, but on the emotional, you're always in fear, or you're always shut down, or you're always frightened of taking the next step, what's going on. And I often say the Hoffman process is for those who are wound too tight. It works best for those who are wound very tight, like the repressed Brit that we've had a couple of examples of, or those who are too loose, who are a bit all over the place. And it basically shows, you know, how to get these four parts more in balance.
There was one point at which we were going into the intellect, and I know there's proprietary, information here, so I want to be careful I don't want to give away the whole process, because then if somebody's thinking about going, they'll have preconceived ideas, or the surprise will kind of be blown in a sense. But there was one point that we were dealing with the part of the Quad Trinity that we're calling the intellect, the mind.
Yeah.
And it was making peace with the intellect and sort of calming it down, almost like patting it on the head and saying, it's okay, okay. Our higher self, our spiritual self has got this. Thank you for your input. Good job, intellect. But we don't need you here right now.
Do you remember how we got there?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I just remember a profound peace came over me, and I was like, I've meditated a lot. I'm aware of concepts and disengaging from the mind and thinking and all of that, but it was just the way that it was presented. What I remember was just that let's communicate from a place where I'm separate from the intellect and communicate with it in a compassionate way and say, thank you so much for trying to support me and protect me, but you're not needed right now. You can go take a nap while my heart or higher self has this experience. So that's kind of my reflection.
Being a teacher of it, I can know exactly sort of where it comes in the process and what would be in the lead up to that. And one of the things we say is, we can't just make an affirmation about, oh, let's all feel peaceful now, or let's all forgive, or let's all move on. We have to do some sort of get in there, down and dirty emotional work beforehand. So before you're able to say to your intellect, I think you can let this one go, your intellect was given free rein to have an enormous shout out. In British slang we call it a Barney, a right old argy-bargy, just flinging all kinds of words out, because there's this frustration, and we have the intellect, imagine in a Gestalt kind of way, talking to this younger self, or the irresponsible self, or the carefree self, or saying, I'm fed up, I have to keep it all together. Because, if you try to meditate when your mind is going all over the place and you're just trying to keep it all together, or you're frustrated, or all of this is going on, it's incredibly hard. You have like half a second. So I think what you're alluding to is you were able to get that because you'd given your intellect, a free rein. And in Buddhism say, if you give a big field to an angry bull, it'll work itself out, but you put that bull into a little barn and it will start kicking the doors down.
I've not heard that. That's cool. I think one of the things in general with the process that resonated with me and was in alignment with other teachings that have been beneficial for me is the idea that the ego and the intellect are not your enemy, and that to fight against them is a futile battle. It's a fool's errand, because the mind thinks. That's what it does. The ego protects itself, or thinks it's protecting you.
Just relax on that one. We're always going to have our egos. We're always going to have our intellect. So how do we work with them? You know, if you're going to be there at the party, what do you bring that's positive? What are the qualities that we can work with? And what are the things that you're maybe not so aware, you know, that are self-destructive? You know, are you over-analytical? Are you over-perfectionistic? So we're saying, yeah, you've got a very valuable intellect, and we do a lot of work around appreciation, gratitude, and a bit of self-appreciation, because a lot of people just find it very, very hard to think, well, what's positive inside of them. And the ego too, yeah, my sense of I, my sense of self, not in a false or shallow way about, you know, bigging myself up in empowerment, but a healing sense of self that goes way back into the very early years and rises through to give a sense of, okay, I'm okay as I am.
Can you describe the process of the cycle of transformation?
Yeah, sure. So, any time that you want to make a profound change, firstly, obvious, you've got to be aware of what's going on. So the 4 steps in the cycle of transformation, the first one is awareness. What is stopping me from moving forward? You know, maybe I find it very hard to meditate, or I find I'm overworking. What's the presenting problem? And again and again in the process we're looking at from different modalities. Is it a pattern from your family? Is it a role you took on? Is it something in your intellect? Is it something in your emotional self? And so on. We're looking at different ways of awareness, and we might talk about, you know, things like vicious cycles later. Then we're saying, okay, you're aware, fantastic. You can be aware, really aware, but nothing will change, so you need to express. And I think that's why people don't talk a lot about what goes on in the process, because there's a lot of expression, and it's kind of hard to explain that. You know, how do I explain what I went through with my emotions that might have been very different from your emotions? And obviously in the course, you know, we've got the room and the time and the lack of distractions to be able to do that. But what we might say to people in any cycle of transformation is be aware and then express it by journaling, or by sharing, or by going for a powerful walk or a run, or chopping wood. Not that you need to do that a lot in Los Angeles, but something where you're physically expressing. You know, it could be dance. So awareness and expression. The next one, and this is one that I hadn't come across before then, and I think it's still pretty rare, is forgiveness and compassion. It's rare because it's a little, I don't know, a little woo-woo, a little soft, and it doesn't have a lot of, you know, academic background to it. And this is where Bob Hoffman's spiritual feel came in with it. What he's saying is, look, you may be in a way, you may have expressed, you may feel very powerful, you may have, you know, let go a lot of the grief and anger. Those are the 2 main things that people are holding on to in terms of needing to express resentment or sadness. Then forgive. But you can only forgive when you've really had that clearing out. You can forgive and get that peace of mind when you've had that real clearing out. So the forgiveness and compassion is necessary in the cycle of transformation before the last part, the 4th part, which is new behavior. What is it now that you can visualize or actualize to actually do to be in new behavior? And already in the process we're trying to get people to see themselves and act in different ways, but that's the ongoing thing. The ongoing thing is to, you know, perhaps a very profound change for people in new behavior is, oh, I'm not the emotional wreck that I thought I was, or I'm okay as I am, or, you know, I have the right to speak up for myself, or I don't have to protect myself as much. Whatever the new behavior is, then we take it further, and we're giving a lot of tools about how to, you know, fine-tune that new behavior. So to recap, hope your attention was still there with me.
Absolutely.
Awareness, expression.
I mean, and plus having experienced it,
Yeah.
I see the way that it's all connected. So yeah, carry on.
Awareness, expression, forgiveness, and new behavior, the 4. And then it comes back to awareness, because, okay, I've done all these, and now I have a new, hopefully higher awareness.
It's interesting that the compassion and forgiveness piece comes after the expression, because it's like, okay, well, just the whole way that it's in order. First is having the awareness, okay, wow, I have a problem, right? And this, you know, for me, this goes into the addiction recovery model. I mean, the very first thing that's necessary is for you to admit to yourself, like, okay, I can't fix this myself. I have a problem here. There's something wrong. But in the getting into the forgiveness and compassion of others and of self, I don't think that's possible unless you've expressed the pain inherent to that resentment or condemnation. You know, it's like how can you forgive someone unless you've been able to get it off your chest, so to speak, you know, whether that be in writing or yelling or talking, or you said like some physical expression of movement or something like that. Otherwise, I think what's happened for me is that I have an intellectual concept that, oh, they didn't mean it, I should forgive them, or I should be more kind and appreciative of myself or self-compassionate, but not really feeling I deserve it because those wounds are still active. You know, I haven't really been able to dig through the pain, so to speak. I'm still repressing or suppressing that stuff. So the forgiveness or compassion is sort of short-lived.
No, you're right. You're
it
right.
It doesn't
it's
go
like,
that deep, you know.
I should be a better person. I should have got over that horrendous relationship.
Yeah.
She lives in New York, but she's still in my head every day, you know. And that's what we're saying. It's an internal forgiveness, because he, she, whoever in the past that we need to forgive may not ever know that. We may never meet them again. But what we're working with is our own resentment or our own guilt or whatever it is that is tying up inside, so we can let go of the past and, you know, have a clean slate. But you're right. It would be lovely to be able to forgive without having to, you know, churn stuff around, because it can be, you know, it can look a bit messy at times. But you're right, and one of the things like Scott Peck, you know, who wrote books a long time ago, and early on, The Road Less Traveled, he said that you can't forgive someone unless you've found them guilty. You can't issue a pardon until you've found them guilty. So in a sense of saying, okay, it was wrong, I can get it out, I need never say it was okay. I need never condone the act, but I don't have to condemn the person. I can move on from that, and what a relief to let go of that and forgive.
I think that's what people have a block with in terms of forgiveness, is they perceive it, and I'm sure I have at times, not so much anymore, but that you're condoning, you know, abusive behavior or something like that. Like when I had to go in and deal with my own childhood abuse, it was difficult at first because it wasn't okay, you know, being traumatized when you're a kid, it's not acceptable. So how can you accept the unacceptable, you know? And it took me a lot of work and a long time to be able to fully zoom out, and having to express the feelings of pain and betrayal and all of that, but then eventually to be able to zoom out and kind of look at the big picture and go, okay, this is just a hurt person that hurts people, you know, and then looking at my own life too, and ways in which I've hurt people because I was hurt, and that brings me into the patterns, actually, which is what I wanted to talk about next. So really, essentially, this cycle of transformation that you just described, I mean, the end goal essentially is to break out of those unconscious or even conscious negative patterns where we keep manifesting the same experience over and over again in relationships or family dynamics. Or
and just before we get on to, you know, the specific patterns that you were mentioning, just that sense of being able to let go needs to be done at that very tender level. And I think if people think we're saying, you know, you can just forgive very easily, you were so right to bring that about. It's only when you've really been in there, and one of the core parts of the process is understanding, and this is something that we have to do emotionally, not intellectually, that those who hurt us, as you say, were hurt themselves. Those who hurt had miserable lives, and it doesn't mean, especially in light of what's come out in, you know, Hollywood in the past couple of weeks, you don't condone that behavior. You never say that's okay, but you can get over your anger and rage about it, so you don't always have the figure of your abuser or oppressor or the school bully or whoever in your mind. You can lay that aside. So it's tricky, but let's get on to the...
Actually, I kind of just brushed over like the whole forgiveness piece, like, and then you just figure it out and it's all good. Someone was asking me about this the other day because they listened to the show and they said, wow, you seem like you've forgiven everyone, you know? And I go, yeah, I have. I don't really remember how it happened, but I think probably from the process of really going into the pain and feeling the betrayal and feeling the hurt and expressing it in a healthy way, after years of repressing it, suppressing it, not expressing it, not sharing it. And also I think just, I call it zooming out, where you can kind of look out and have some empathy for the offending party,
Yeah,
without saying, yeah, what they did is right, or even what they're doing now is right, but to see that every human being is really doing the best they can in any given moment.
And to get that on a real heartfelt level,
Yeah.
to really understand that gives you a lot of freedom just to move on in life.
It does, yeah. And I've found too that even relationships that I thought had no chance because there had been harm on both sides, when both parties have found that deep forgiveness and sort of been able to step outside of the drama of it and really look like, all right, we're both just being idiots and you both just forgive each other and move on. It's like nothing ever happened. It's just fine. You know, sometimes it can happen in an instant. It's that surrender moment where you stop fighting the person or the situation.
Yeah, no, as you say it, I get a real sense from you that, something very calm comes about you when you talk about that. You don't know quite happened, but something shifted.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It just hurts to hurt, man. After a while, it's just like, God, I really can't live with resentment and condemnation for other people. But I also, over time, have become much less tolerant of bullshit, too. I mean, if I'm in a situation where that it's unhealthy or I'm being harmed or not respected or mistreated in any way, I mean, I'm out so fast. I also, I have like really low tolerance for...
a healthier boundary, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there, yeah. So that makes it easier to forgive because it's like, well, cool. You do you, it's fine.
I'm not going to be trampled on all over again.
But it doesn't. But I don't have to keep putting myself in those situations where I was harmed. Because in my life earlier on, a lot of times when I'd be in a situation in which I would get betrayed or hurt or however you want to contextualize it, it's because I had some selfish motive in that situation, and I kind of like got myself into it. Unconsciously or consciously, got hurt.
That's the thing, yeah.
And in taking responsibility, I think, is where maybe you're sensing like, oh, there's this peace around that. It's because I see my part in every situation that I've been in. I mean, there was, when I was really young and I was the victim of abuse, I mean, there were definitely situations in which I had no responsibility at all.
Sure.
And those were difficult to forgive and took some time because I didn't do anything. I'm an innocent kid. But as an adult, I mean, if I'm really honest with myself, it's like, well, Luke, you poked the beehive and they came out and stung you.
What's going to happen?
Can you blame the bees?
Yeah.
You wanted the honey and you got in there and you did it to yourself in a sense. And then comes the self-forgiveness of like, not going, oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that either,
So it's done with kindness. Because there are two things there. One of them is, the victim is a nice role to fill in, and you don't have any choice about it as a child perhaps. But what about if you, and this comes into I think about patterns, a pattern becomes so set, or the role of a victim becomes so set that that's what I'll set up in life. And so one of the things we're saying is, we're actually asking people to be honest about, have you been a victim? Are you often the scapegoat? Yeah, but that's always other people's fault. Well, no, see how it is. You're the one person who's always in that situation, and then don't beat yourself up for it. Don't use your knowledge about patterns and things just to beat yourself up. Move on with kindness and gentleness. And I'd say in the cycle of transformation, when you come down to awareness, always do it with self-love. Else it's just beating yourself up more.
What are some of these family roles, these archetype family roles that end up forming the patterns of our personalities in our lives?
Okay, well, the top two that sort of trip off my tongue, one of them is the black sheep, the rebel. There'll always be one in the family who will go against the grain and always do the wrong things and act out, and part of that is perhaps for more attention. At least I'll get some attention when you're disciplining me. And the other one is the goody-goody. A lot of people just will always follow the rule book, and they're coming to the process not because everything's been, fallen about them, but because they never seem to get their needs met. They've done the perfect life, career, marriage, and so on. But there are many others. Somebody can be the entertainer. I think I've been in Hollywood now a few days, so I've seen a few of those.
Yeah.
They're the funny guy or funny girl who gets the family laughing and dissolves the tension. Or they can be even early on, they can be very tidy and perfectionistic. You can see sort of obsessive behavior coming on, because my world, if it's ordered neatly like that, then I can understand it, then it's safe. So the entertainer, the goody-goody, the black sheep, the star, somebody who, you know, automatically has a lot of attention because they do very well at school. I mean, you have one sheet that has sort of, you know, a couple of hundred of them. May I ask what yours might have been?
Well, you nailed it on the first one, the black sheep.
Ah.
Yeah. You know,
it's more interesting than being a goody-goody, though, isn't it?
Well, I think it's kind of more badass, you know. But there's a price to pay.
Sure
there's a price to
yeah.
pay for rebellion. I mean, you know, I caused myself a lot of pain and victimized myself, really, as a result of that defiance and that rebellion. But of course, that was just my mechanism of protecting myself. And, you know, as you said, it's better to get negative attention than to be ignored.
Yeah.
And that was definitely the route that I took. Yeah, for sure. But I think, you know, don't all of us display at different times and different dynamics those roles? Because I've also been the hero of the family and tried to save everyone. And
yeah. No, we're simplifying, but it sometimes allows us to work in, you know, a cluster of patterns. So if you were the hero for a long time, we could work with that. If you were the black sheep for a long time, we could work with that. And in each of them, you know, how much have you suffered, which is your motivation for change. So yeah, we may be in different roles, but it's the ones that, you know, come into our work, come into our relationships. That's what we want to look at. They've gone on too long.
And what are resistance patterns?
Well, resistance pattern, you know, because we use it, I suppose, because we've got a short time. We've got just a week to work with people, and we'll say, what is it that you may bring here that you're aware of, or maybe, you know, other people have told you about, that could get in the way of this or life. So a resistance pattern would, for me, being the example I would have given, be overanalyzing, you know, splitting hairs so much that I would never move on. A resistance pattern would be of a black sheep would say, "Oh, I'm not doing this, man. This is uncool. This is not my scene."
Yeah. You want me to cry in front of a group of people? Excuse me?
I ain't doing that.
Didn't you see my leather jacket when I walked in? I ain't crying, man.
Another one, because we just thought about those ones, another one may be, even a goody-goody can be a resistance pattern, because you won't actually be invested in doing something for yourself. You'll just be compliant. You'll just submit to doing it along. We'll say, actually, don't use that. You've used that all along. You know, do something when your heart and your soul are really in there.
There's a couple things that I remember in the process that intrigued me, or it's two sides of one thing, and that was the difference between, I believe it was submission and surrender.
Okay. Yeah, we make a clear distinction, although they sound a bit similar. Submitting would mean, okay, I'm just going to do this. Yeah, throw it at me. You know, I'm giving up my phone for a week. What am I going to do? I'm stuck here in the woods. Going along, you know, what is it? Expression you have, phoning it in. You know, you're there, but you're not there.
Right.
Surrendering is, we're saying, being there wholly, consciously, knowing that you don't know all the answers and you're willing to learn something new. And we have to sort of educate people that surrendering doesn't mean also I give up the white flag of surrender. It's more, you know, a spiritual discipline. I was surrendering my sense of ego, or surrendering my sense of how I've acted in the world. And we say we're surrendering to the best part of myself, surrendering to my spiritual self, so I can move on and listen to the more wise parts of me.
Yeah, I find that really valuable. A term that I've heard in place of the word submission is compliance. You know, where you're, like you said, you're just kind of going along with, oh yeah, okay, what do you want me to do? Sure, and sort of, you know, almost placating.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a good word for that.
It's interesting because it seems that actually blocks the surrender process, because it puts up this wall, or even if you want to surrender, if you're sort of just going along, but there's still a hint of resistance, then you can't get to that deeper place where you just I mean, my favorite place in the world is to be surrendered. I mean, that's where serenity and peace lives. It's just going, okay, I admit I don't know what's best. I'm teachable, I'm humble, I'm willing to learn. You know, it's like to the ego, though, surrender is like, it's the arch enemy, because like you said, it's that white flag, isn't it? Where you're like, oh, so does that mean I'm going to become gullible or be taken advantage of or be victimized?
And the ego is so clever and so subtle and will play all types of games to try to get back there. So you kind of need a program, you need a reminder like the Serenity Prayer, you know, that let me just be able to figure out what it is that I can control, what it is I can't, because the beauty is knowing, knowing the difference that there is.
Yeah.
There are times when I just have to give up.
Do you find that there are a lot of people that come to the process? I mean, because it's something, once you volunteer that and you're paying money to go to this thing and you take time out of your life, I mean, I'm assuming most people want to get some results and they want to participate, but do you find a lot of people have a hard time being that vulnerable?
Well, being vulnerable in the sense of what, showing their emotions, or
so, you know, showing your emotions and going through the process of expression and really talking about your inner world in an honest, transparent way.
It is bizarre because, you know, after the first sort of 3 or 4 years working here, I went and took the process to the UK, and you know, my own background and those that I've worked with most come from a place where you don't just automatically share your experiences. So how is it that we do that? One of the things, and I would say with the British and with anybody, is the bigger the front, the bigger the back. If you've got a lot of stuff to repress, there's also a great willingness, not conscious, not one that you'd volunteer at a evening out, but a great willingness to want to get it out. And there's a certain, I suppose, structure of the group, the safety of being a retreat center and so on, that allows it, but also we make it difficult for people to get there. We make the barrier to entry higher than there would be in something. It's not a weekend, it's not cheap, you've got to give, I don't know, how long did it take you to do the coursework beforehand? It's a few hours, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of work leading up to it.
And I don't know how many other courses you have to do where you fill in lots of things, you know, if you're applying to, you know, university perhaps, but it asks you for quite a bit. So people come in invested already, and there are quite a few people that are always saying now's not the right time, you know, they won't send in their work or they don't get it. I mean, you basically have to admit, I will be there not having the control I usually have over my week. And some people think, sod it, I'm going to go for it. And the advice I had, and I hear a lot of people give that advice to their friends, is just do it. Just when you're there, go for it.
Yeah, that's what I did. I mean, I think I was fortunate enough when I went through the process that right at that moment, that week when I think I consider it like checked myself in, it was almost like an emotional rehab or treatment center. I mean, it's like what happened when I was 26. You know, I hit this just critical point where I just could not go on, and I finally submitted to a 28-day treatment program. And literally the best decision I ever made in my life. But I was at a real emotional, due to a couple of issues with a couple different, you know, primary relationships at the time when I, you know, called Hoffman and was like, I need to get in. When's there a spot? You know, I'm like, I was almost like running out of LA with my ass on fire. You know, I was just like, oh my God, I don't care what happens. I just need to not be by my phone and my email. I just need to be in the woods doing something other than thinking about my problems and this pain that I was going through, you know. So I think that's one of the reasons too that I think I got out, and it's sort of like I was punch drunk in a way. I'm like, what just happened? I'm not really sure. I came back, people said, how was it? I said, it was great. Well, what happened? I go, you know, I don't really know. I think I went in there just so beat down at that particular point.
Well, you were ready, Luke. You were really ready. And that's what we say, come when you're really ready, when you're fed up of being fed up.
So there was no resistance. I had no power with which to resist the process at all. I was probably like the perfect...
Take me, I'm yours.
Yeah, the perfect participant, because there was no compliance, there was no submission, there was no fight. I was just like, I need help. Whatever you guys tell me to do, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go completely balls out and give it all I've got. Right. But it has been interesting though. You know how I've noticed the transformation is the way people treat me in my interpersonal relationships is different. Yeah, really
Like
strange.
how?
The people that I'm close to, I wouldn't say that they didn't have respect for me, but they seem to have more now.
Oh,
and
great.
and you know, that would lead me to believe that perhaps I've gained a bit of self-worth and self-respect, because a lot of the process really is about self-love and
It is a lot.
self-forgiveness,
Yeah.
you know, and that happened on a conscious level, but I think it sort of takes some time for that to land and come to fruition in one's life. And as I've gotten back into my day-to-day grind, I just notice, I don't know, people just...
Maybe you got a whole different energy field,
I
different
think so.
feel about you.
Well,
Yeah.
I think so, because it's palatable, you know, in certain relationships where, I don't know.
Also, it's been 4 months now, and we say, you know, it
Yeah.
does take time to filter through. In fact, we say don't make any, you know, big decisions in life for the first 3 months.
Yeah.
And people talk about, you know, they can feel the effects after 9 months, it's like a birth, or after 2 years, and people still talk about it 10 years. So may you continue to feel the effects.
I think so. I mean, it's a lot has changed for me on the inside, and even just what we're doing here, doing my podcast. I mean, I had been doing that for maybe close to a year when I went, but just my whole approach to it, and I think my level of confidence in the content that I'm creating and what I'm contributing to the world has gone up so much. I think I've become much less apologetic, and I've become much more vulnerable, just publicly authentic and real, and I just don't give a shit.
Well, great.
That's
That's a great testimonial. Can I just say to our listeners that Luke's Storey is not being sponsored or paid for in any way to make this message.
No, I mean, you know, and that's the thing. Before we started, Tim, I said, I get nothing out of promoting the Hoffman process except God, just helping people, hopefully, and it's a great organization.
Oh,
but
thank you.
when I find health devices or different types of therapy or spiritual approaches, like, this is what I do, is I report about it, you know, and
a great messenger for them.
I have, you know, and I have no shame in doing that, because I think one of my roles in the world is to sort of discover what works and what doesn't, and to share what works with people. And as I was telling you, I've already had 2 listeners go through the Hoffman process and have amazing results, just based on me mentioning it a few times. So, you know, imagine...
Hopefully I won't put them off then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's the thing, you know, speaking of those patterns, though, I mean, I've yet to have my own children. It could happen someday. I mean, I'm 47. I guess I got to start thinking about it sometime soon. But I really think, as a result of the work that I've done on myself and looking at these patterns that come from my family and my upbringing, that I have a really good chance of breaking many of those patterns and not passing those on to the next generation. So, you know, I'm just one person with one podcast interviewing, you know, one Hoffman facilitator, but imagine the ripple effect of all the work you've done for all of these years and the work that I'm just beginning to do now.
As Bob Hoffman said, you know, let's change the world one person at a time. You know, you treat each person profoundly and individually. But you're one. You know, you've been listening to about 1 million people now with all your podcasts. You know, there is of course a ripple effect.
Yeah, it's cool. So in that, I want to cover a little more about the family, because this is an obvious phenomenon that's dealt with in therapy. I mean, it's the therapeutic model. You're going, hey, you know, what are your mommy and daddy issues?
Right.
Were you adopted or abused or abandoned and whatever? And that seems to shape our life, and so many of these patterns come out of that. And a lot of the Hoffman process is involved in, you know, looking at the relationship with your primary caregivers and just your family in general. I mean, does anyone have healthy, normal parents that don't screw them up?
Well, I don't meet them in my work. You know, maybe I'm not seeing
don't...
the wide demographic sample come to the Hoffman process.
Right.
Maybe, hopefully there are. Hopefully there are. But obviously, you know, my work is with that, and maybe, you know, you've met a few. And, you know, there are those who say on a spiritual level, maybe we have a challenging time as children to grow from that. You know, maybe we learning these lessons about love, learning these lessons about compassion. That's the grist for the mill, you know, and parents try to do the best they can with their own limited resources. You know, there weren't any parenting classes or whatever when they were bringing us up. So it is a fundamental thing we all have to deal with. Did I get enough love and attention? And it's very hard when parents are at work or got other kids and so on. But the important thing to remember is whether our parents were wonderful or not, what story do we make up about them? What is it that we're carrying forward 20, 30 years or so down the road that may or may not be true? But the important thing is we feel it, and we need to express it, and we need to change it so we can change our own behavior, and that have a ripple effect on society. That's why mum and dad are templates. We learn from them.
There was a point at which I was probably 10 years older than my parents were when they had me, when I was born. So I think they were 27, maybe like my late 30s. I started to look back on myself at 27 and look at my poor parents, and then look at their parents, and God bless them. And I didn't really know either of my grandfathers, but both my grandmothers, although they had their issues like all of us, they were really sweet generally. They gave me a lot of love. But just looking at the way my parents had been parented, and they just had no shot at doing a good job with me. And then going back, oh my God, if I had children at 27 years old, how bad I would have screwed them up. And even at that point at 37, I'd been working on myself for 10, 12 years or something, and still was basically clueless. Looking back now, I'm 47, 10 years ago, I was like, oh my God, I was still such a disaster.
What have I learned since then?
Yeah, and so it's like, I think that's going back to that forgiveness piece, is when you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and looking at our parents and just knowing that I don't think any parent has a kid and thinks to themselves, all right, what's the worst possible decisions I could make? I want to be the most evil,
Let's
abusive.
make a list of the top 10 things that will mess you up.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course they don't.
Every parent is like doing the very best they can, and I think when you get to that point of realization, there's a real freedom in that, and having compassion for your parents, and then there's, as you said, is they're not. You've done a lot of spiritual work and research. From your life view, would you say that in a sense we've chosen the circumstances of our birth and our parents to a degree in order to have those lessons?
I could say that on one level, because it sounds lovely and gives us a real reason to grow. But the scientist in me will say, "Where's the proof of that?"
Yeah.
So the two points of view can exist in my mind.
And I guess that's really inherent to the Hoffman process. There is the analytical, scientific model and approach, but then there is this other pretty woo-woo element to the process. There were a number of things, and they're hard to remember in the process. There were a lot of exercises where I felt as if I was being hypnotized. There were these visualization journeys that we went on, and I'm pretty damn woo-woo. I do Kundalini yoga. I practically walk around with cobras inside a turban. I'm out there and willing to do some crazy stuff, but there were moments in the process where I was like, is this really happening right now? This is pretty weird, and I don't want to give away some of the surprises, but there was definitely an element of visualization and journeys that we would go on. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, where there was the one thing where you kind of went through this process of expressing the intellect and then making peace with the intellect. And I just sat there, and my mind was so quiet. And there were a number of different, very spiritual, guided meditation moments in the process, during which and after which I felt this profound sense of peace. But those were punctuated with these periods of expression. And,
exactly, yeah.
So it's a very much like a roller coaster experience. So
it is an emotional roller coaster, and there's also the great calm, and we're trying to build on that throughout the week. So I don't know, when you said snakes in your turban and stuff, we never do anything as weird as that. I thought, what is it that's so weird about it? But because it's my day job, it isn't weird for me.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of the time we're working when people's eyes are closed. We're passing images, like calming ones, like picture yourself in a beautiful place in nature. Feel breathing and everything relax, and then allow different memories or different possibilities of how your life to be in there. As the week goes on, your ability to fall down and relax in those, your ability to concentrate and stay with that grows deeper. So when you come out of it, you're still in a state of probably, hopefully calmness. But it's working with the model of the Quad Trinity. We'll have a chat with your intellect, we'll give a 10, 15, 20-minute explanation and all the intellects, and, oh, I just have a question about that, so we're saying, okay, great, take care of the intellects. Then we may have an emotional expression thing, so there's a bit for the emotional part that gets out there. We'll say, okay, now calm your bodies, let's have the spiritual nature be more nurtured now, because we've done all that. Close your eyes, some music comes on, we'll give you some images, and then you can take it away from that. We're not sort of saying this is a religion or this is a specific spiritual thing. We're just allowing people to get a sense of greater openness and quietness in there.
Yeah, well, I really liked that stuff because I needed a break at various times from the intense emotional work too.
No one can take that all the time.
Yeah.
Actually, it's been called speed suffering. I thought that was a very good phrase for those who want to get it over, do a lot of it in a short time.
That's cool, like speed dating. That's
speed
funny.
suffering.
Yeah, I would agree. Does that expression of emotional pain and turmoil ever end? I mean, is there ever a point at which we're empty and we don't need to express that stuff anymore?
No, but what I would say is what we're getting rid of is the historical build-up. So we'll always have occasions to feel sadness. We may have occasions when somebody, does something wrong to us where we feel rightfully indignant. But what we're saying is we need to express the volcanic charge, the volcano that's been building up for years and years, which is like, say, I want to speak out here, or I'm not being heard, or whatever it is, the voice that's the 6-year-old Luke or the 4-year-old Tim, and that's what's coming out. Of course, we're always going to have feelings.
But you think you can actually get to the bottom of that well of, that vault of pain from the past, that it can be expressed to the point where it's dissipated and essentially gone?
I certainly felt that. I certainly felt that whatever it was, that I didn't have much access to my feeling, and I had a very powerful experience of letting go. I'd done quite a bit of the anger work. What I needed to do was the softer work. And somehow the amount of time that I could express that, and there were a lot of tears for me there, it got out so much that, for instance, I had a terrible happening. My brother committed suicide a few years later. If I hadn't done the Hoffman process, I wouldn't have been able even to get there. I was so frightened of emotion that I wasn't able to. And I was there, and I was crying, and I was upset because I could touch in without having the feeling that it would go on and on and on and on and on. So it's a subtle thing, and I can't give a finite answer, but it allows people, I think, to be more appropriate with their feelings.
I would agree. I think having personally had the experience of facing really intense, uncomfortable feelings, facing pain, sadness, trauma, and then living to tell the tale. It's like you get on the other side of it and you're like, that actually wasn't that bad once it subsides. And this is a process that I'm actually trying to integrate into my life more and more, rather than repressing and suppressing negative emotions, whether it be fear or pain or loss of an attachment or lost love or whatever it is, to actually just go into it and allow it to kind of wash over me and be expressed in the moment, rather than running and hiding from it and having it come out in some seemingly unrelated, unhealthy way that damages my, current relationships or work or whatever it is that I'm trying to do. So I think you're right in that there's like this boogeyman of feelings that
I can't go there.
Yeah, that I've run from. I mean, really, I
Yeah.
spent the first half of my life doing everything I can. I mean, so many self-destructive behaviors just to keep from feeling anything. And then you go through things like the Hoffman process, and you sort of let that, genie out of the bottle, and it's like, it actually wasn't that big of a deal. It's like
Still intense, but it isn't going to kill me.
Yeah, it doesn't. You live. Like I said, you live to tell the tale. It's sort of like, well, that sucked. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's fun to have that, express pain essentially, but it doesn't kill you. And then I find that I'm able to just sort of build that in a more habitual way.
Good for you, great.
I'm learning how to face uncomfortable feelings momentarily, rather than having them build up to the point where they become so scary that I never want to deal with them.
Great.
So I'm fully on board with that. it's kind of uncomfortable way to live when one has spent their whole life running from that. But
it's so new.
Yeah, but I am getting used to it, and it's funny because I didn't make the correlation between the process where you're dealing with those emotions in such a focused way that would then make it easier to deal with them as they come up.
But imagine as a teacher how many times I've heard somebody say, "Oh, I can't go there. Once I open it, it will never stop," and having to find ways to persuade them to at least start the experience so they can go through it and find what's on the other side, rather than, you say, just being scared of the boogeyman of feelings and never going there.
Yeah. Have you had people in the process that just absolutely flat out refuse to go there and just won't do the work and won't face things?
Of the thousands of people who've done it, because I've, as I said, done it for nearly 30 years, I've sometimes seen somebody manage not to cry, but it's incredibly difficult, and that they may have said, I was crying for the 3 months up to now, whatever, their tear ducts. Because we talked about the barriers to entry being quite high, most people are very willing, they really want to go there. And we have our ways, there are methods that we have of softening people up. It's been called, like a rite of passage for the smart ass. People say, how do you manage to get people who are so cynical or so in their heads feeling? And I say, well, it's a bunch of people have been thinking about this for 50 years now, 50 years this year. We've been putting together methods to, I was going to say crack the nuts, soften up the people.
Is there not a process of encouragement when you're working with a group of people and you have the people that are more able to access their emotions? Do you think that creates an energy field, so to speak, where it opens the floodgates for someone who's more resistant?
For sure. So, and that is one of the joys of working in a group. Somebody who wouldn't have the courage to go there here's so-and-so, opposite them or next door to them, opening up. It may be opening up about their personal story. It may be opening up using their voice. It may be opening up with their heart and having tears. But yeah, it gives enormous permission. Oh, this is okay. Oh, so you, who I was talking to at dinner, who had this interesting story, you can do that. What? Well, then I'm going to allow myself to go there.
Yeah, I found that to be true. I think also, I don't know, there's a certain amount of shame and embarrassment in emoting and like crying or yelling or doing like deep emotional work. I mean, I think for me, my ego is like, oh, you're going to look stupid. People are going to laugh at you. You look like a wuss. You look like an idiot. You're going to have snot all over you. Whatever it is, it's like very much being afraid of what people think. But when in a group setting where everyone's kind of going, I don't know, it's sort of...
I find it quite relaxing. Oh, you mean I don't have to keep my image together? Oh, yeah. You mean, I can do all that? Yeah, it's like, it was so much effort to keep the
it sort of jars everything,
yeah.
It jars everything loose, I think, in my experience. It's sort of like, oh God, you almost can't not just participate in that. And I guess that also is part of the thing I was saying is the results that I'm sort of unpacking these short few months later is that ability to just kind of not care anymore and just allow myself to be my sloppy, imperfect self out in the world and on this show and everything like that. But
the human being that is Luke.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to cover in terms of the process, which is, I think, for me, kind of the whole goal is learning how to operate in the world from my spiritual self or my higher self, like that true being that I am beyond the ego and the intellect and the personality and my trauma and my past and my family and patterns and all that crap, but just the true, unadulterated spiritual being that I am. Would you say that's the goal of the process? And what are some ways in which we can learn how to make decisions and perform from that perspective rather than...
I think you put it very aptly. Some people, who don't want so much of an unpsychological or unscientific basis, I would say to them, the goal of it is to feel yourself as a loving being. If we take it, as your model as being spiritual, what we'd say is you need to build a relationship with that part of you. So you need to every day find a time to have more quietness, find a time where you've turned off your devices, find a time where you do stuff that is nourishing to yourself, find a time to listen. So the goal of it is to take what you learn in the process and build on that. How do I want my life to be? And rather than rushing into life and making ourselves busy, because it's never been easier to be to be a long distance from myself. Going through life slower and building on that self-love, which then can be passed out to others by having a relationship, by making time and space with that more silent part of ourselves.
What effect has being a facilitator for all these years had on you?
I was thinking because I saw my sons recently. They're now 20 and 21, and I remember when they came along in the world, we thought, oh my God, already we've heard every story about how miserable, how horrible childhood could be. How hard is it going to be? And the main effect for me was that it's quite easy to be a parent. You just need to be present and loving, and that's the main thing. So that was a huge effect. But I would say back when I first took it, the effect was of growing up. It's like I had been the rebellious teenager up into my 30s, and it was a little tiring by then. So it allowed me to relax. And oh, you mean I don't have to fight against everybody or feel threatened by them? So it's like you were talking about a relaxation. The big difference to me was if I'm this way, if I can accept myself, all the other things like depression go away, or trying to impress people. As somebody said before I did the process, they said, Tim, you don't have to know everything for us to love you still. So it's relaxing. It's okay.
That's funny, because you were more of the intellectual.
I was always the one with a book in my always spouting some factoid.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some of the practices that you personally use now when you're presented with a challenge in life where anxiety or emotional pain might come up?
A very good question, because I wonder sort of around what's conscious and what's unconscious. So the conscious one is, I know it's okay to feel, and the conscious one is keep breathing through it, because especially the anxiety can shorten the breathing, narrow the chest. But in order to get some distance, sometimes I will need just to take back a step, and I will sit with it, or write with it, or walk with it. And I'll do, there are a whole lot of tools. Before I would have retained it in my body, and now I'll go out and do something, I'll walk with it. Faced with a really challenging situation, I would have a battery of tools, I think. I would have a small toolbox with me to try. One of them might just be writing something down, or meeting somebody, talking to somebody about it, rather than just thinking, here we go again, I've got to figure it out, I've just got to control it. The main thing though, I guess, and I kind of feel it a bit in your face and your aura, is I got from my week in Hoffman, and then by being involved more as a facilitator, a huge shift in self-image. And that was not from a book, that was not from a group experience, it was just something came inside and shattered an old image, and life was very much easier after that. And luckily with my work as a facilitator, I'm reminded of that a lot.
That's cool. That's cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So, as we come to the end of this conversation, I'd like to ask you a three-part question. Who have the three teachers or teachings that have influenced your life and your work? Could be a book, philosophy, person, anything.
Three.
Yes.
Three over the years. Okay, so
for some people, it's hard to limit it to three. For some people, they can only come up with one.
Okay, well, the first one comes to mind. So I'm 22, I've finished my first degree in England, and I go to India. And there was a teacher there called Munindraji, who was in the Burmese tradition of Vipassana. Now mindfulness is like the new black.
Interesting, yeah.
But he was there, he taught at the Burmese Vihara, and I would just sit with him.
I just interviewed Sharon Salzberg, and she learned to meditate in India in the Buddhist tradition from Burmese teachers. It was interesting.
She would definitely have come across him, because I think she was in that. I think it was called the forest Thai tradition, as well as the Burmese tradition. But anyway, that was huge, because that has reminded me all. The second one would definitely be Bob Hoffman. The third, I think it is hard to limit, because I love to read a lot, and there are always people who are giving me new ideas. So how can I limit it? One of the things that has helped me with psychology and with spirituality, funnily enough, is to read a lot about history and to read a fair bit and to understand a bit about primatology, so that there are certain things we can change and there are certain things that are so deep in human, and I'm reminded of that. And one of the best books I've written, which is that's a slip, I've read, came out just a couple of years, called Sapiens, and his name, Yuval Noah Harari, I think, goes through the whole cycle of life, and I think after that, okay, that explains why people have such a hard time with revenge, or that explains why there's been an empire of this or that. If you know that, we're always dealing with that. What we've got now is actually a fantastic new, different society, despite reading the news every day.
Cool. Thanks for the tip on that. That's great information. Yeah, I find it interesting too to go back and sort of look at the collective habit mind of humanity as we've evolved, and you can sort of see how the instincts and the ego perpetuate in the same ways over time. I find that interesting too. So in closing, where can we find you, your book? I know you have written a book about the Hoffman process. Where are your website, social media, any of that you'd like to promote?
Well, hoffmaninstitute.org for all the information about the process and how it's come about. The book is called The Hoffman Process, quite easy, by me. I guess it's on Amazon. I don't see it in every...
It is.
Not that there are many bookstores around anymore.
Yeah.
The website, and it's across the world. It's in a bunch of different countries. So if you go on Hoffman-international.com, you'll see where it is if you are Russian or French or Italian or Brazilian or whatever.
Oh, that's amazing. That's crazy. Think about the ripple effect that this movement or this process is having in the world. And now, to an even greater degree, because a few thousand people are going to hear this interview.
Excellent.
So thank you so much, man. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me on the show, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Lovely seeing you this time.
Thank you.